Breaking news to tell you about a disturbing story out of Charles County. La Plata Police and Charles County Sheriff's officers were called to the Willis Memorial Park just before 7 this morning. There they found a 24-year-old woman pushing what appeared to be a 3-year-old in a swing.
You ever see something so strange your brain doesn't even know how to process it? Imagine walking through a quiet park on a weekday morning. The sun's just starting to break through the clouds. There's barely anyone around except for one woman. She's standing by the swings, not pacing, not on her phone, just gently pushing. And in that swing, a small child. Head slumped forward, motionless. At first glance, you might think he's just sleeping, but then you realize he hasn't moved at all. And she's been there for 40 hours. No one else comes. She keeps pushing. By the time someone finally calls the police, it's been 2 days. And that little boy? He'd been gone the entire time. Not kidnapped, not assaulted, just gone. Quietly, while his mother stood beside him, still pushing, still waiting. So now you're probably wondering, how does a moment like this even happen? How does a mother end up here, completely unaware that her child has slipped away? Well, to understand that, you have to go all the way back, before the swing, before the voices, before the system failed, both of them. Let's start at the beginning. It started with a conversation. Just two people crossing paths at a basketball game. Romechia Simms was in her early 20s, young, soft-spoken, and full of plans. She wanted to graduate, maybe become a teacher. People who knew her said she was sweet, a little quiet, but smart, thoughtful. Ji'Aire Lee was working security that night. Tall, calm, always polite. He wasn't flashy, but he had presence. And when their eyes met in the crowd, something clicked. They started talking. Small talk turned into longer conversations. A few meetups after work, some dinners. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of slow, simple connection that turns into something more. Both of them lived in Clinton, Maryland. Not a big city, but not a one-stoplight town either. The kind of place where word gets around, especially when two young people start spending time together. And for a while, things looked good. Romechia was taking college courses. James was holding down steady work. They weren't rich, not even close, but they were trying, figuring it out together. Then came the news that changed everything. Romechia was pregnant. And suddenly, what had started as something light-hearted turned into something real, fast. That baby, Ji'Aire Lee, would change both of their lives forever. Let me tell you a little more about Ji'Aire. Because once you understand who he was, what happened next becomes that much harder to stomach. 6 pounds, wide eyes, and a cry that filled the hospital room. But once he settled down, once they laid him on her chest, everything got quiet. Like the whole world paused just for them. Romechia had always dreamed of doing something meaningful with her life. But from the moment Ji'Aire was born, her purpose became crystal clear. He was the kind of baby who demanded attention and returned it tenfold. Always reaching, always kicking. As soon as he could crawl, he was into everything. And once he started laughing, you couldn't stop him. He was curious about everything. Colors, sounds, people's faces. He lit up around family, especially his cousins. He followed them around like a shadow. They'd chase each other through the house, tumbling, giggling, making every room feel alive. James was proud too. He might not have shown it the way Romechia did, but he loved that boy. Stepping in when he could, helping with diapers, making sure there was always food on the table, doing what he could with what he had. They weren't a picture-perfect family, but in their own way, they were trying. For a little while, things felt steady, peaceful even. They found a 2-bedroom apartment in La Plata, Maryland. A small town, slower pace. Just the kind of place where a toddler could run around barefoot on the carpet while cartoons played in the background. And in those quiet, everyday moments, it really seemed like they might be okay. But good moments don't always last. Especially when something darker is already creeping in, quietly, patiently, just waiting for its chance to take hold. The thing about photos is, they don't show the full picture. You can look at a smiling mother and her toddler and never see the eviction notice taped to the front door, or the overdue bills piling up on the counter. That was the reality for Romechia Simms. She was doing everything she could. Finishing school, working retail, raising Ji'Aire mostly on her own, but trying doesn't always mean surviving. Ji'Aire Lee was still in the picture, just not under the same roof. He helped when he could. Diapers, rent, groceries, but it wasn't enough. Not with rent going up and hours at work getting cut. At some point, the stress between them boiled over. They didn't hate each other, but love couldn't fix the weight they were carrying, so they split. No drama, just exhaustion. They agreed to share parenting, split the weeks, keep things peaceful for Ji'Aire. And for a little while, they did. But underneath it all, Romechia was slipping. Not just emotionally, not just financially, something deeper, something no one, not even she, fully understood yet. This is where the story begins to shift. What came next wasn't a bad decision or a moment of weakness. It wasn't laziness or selfishness. It was something far more frightening. It was Romechia Simms' own mind turning against her. It started quietly. That's how these things usually do. She began losing sleep. Not just staying up late, but lying in bed, eyes wide for hours, heart racing, thoughts spiraling. Sometimes she'd call her mother in the middle of the night and say she just felt off, couldn't explain why. And then came the tension. Her once soft, thoughtful demeanor gave way to long periods of silence. She'd zone out during conversations, forget things, simple things, seemed jumpy, always glancing over her shoulder, locking doors twice, sometimes 3 times. At first her family chalked it up to stress. After all, she was juggling school, a toddler, and the emotional weight of a recent breakup. Who wouldn't be overwhelmed? But it didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. She became convinced people were watching her, following her, listening to her through the walls. She'd stop mid-sentence and look over her shoulder like someone had just whispered her name. She started talking about patterns in the lights, cars parked too long across the street, neighbors who knew too much. What used to be occasional unease turned into full-blown paranoia. And then the voices arrived. She never announced it, never said, "I hear things," but her actions began to speak for her. She would hold entire conversations with people who weren't in the room, stare at corners for minutes at a time, as if waiting for instructions. The fear wasn't just inside her anymore. It was shaping the way she moved through the world. Family members began to notice. Her mother, Vontasha, started getting frantic phone calls, not asking for help, but begging for it. Romechia would speak in short, clipped bursts, describing things that weren't real. Men with weapons, people breaking into her home, being followed on foot. Each time, her mother would rush over. Each time, the apartment would be silent. No broken windows, no intruders, no signs of anyone, just Romechia. Wide-eyed, sweating, clutching Ji'Aire in her arms, and still convinced someone was after her. Even her stepfather started getting those calls, and every time he arrived, it was the same. No threat, just terror. Out of desperation, they requested security footage from the apartment building, hoping, praying they'd see something, some proof she wasn't losing her mind. But the footage showed nothing. No one lurking in the hallways, no one breaking in, just her, alone, frightened, slowly unraveling. This wasn't a bad week. It wasn't postpartum. It wasn't stress. This was something far more dangerous. Something that would soon have life and death consequences. Eventually, something had to give. Romechia's mother, Romechia Simms, had seen enough. The fear in her daughter's voice wasn't just anxiety. It was something darker, something she couldn't reason with or talk down. So one day, after yet another panicked call, and another fruitless trip to the apartment, she made a decision. She put Romechia and Ji'Aire in the car and drove straight to the hospital. No more waiting. No more hoping things would just get better. Doctors ran their evaluations. They observed the confusion, the paranoia, the way Romechia's thoughts jumped from one fear to the next with no clear thread. And finally, they gave the family something they didn't expect but in some strange way needed. A name. Paranoid schizophrenia. It wasn't a cure, but it was an explanation. A framework for everything they had witnessed and couldn't make sense of. The doctors prescribed medication, powerful antipsychotics designed to quiet the chaos in her mind. And at first, it helped. The voices softened. The paranoia faded just enough. She could sleep, eat, function. For the first time in months, Romechia seemed to be coming back to herself. And Vontasha wasn't taking any chances. She invited her daughter and grandson to move in with her, Whatever it took to keep them safe, to keep Ji'Aire in stable hands, to make sure Romechia stayed on her medication. It wasn't ideal. They were living at the Deluxe Inn, a cheap roadside motel in La Plata, Maryland. 1 room, 3 people, thin walls, no real privacy, just a few beds and a mini fridge. But it was something. For a little while, they found a fragile kind of balance. Romechia was still sick, but she was trying, taking her pills, staying close to family, watching cartoons with Ji'Aire, brushing his hair in the mornings, kissing his forehead before bed. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time in a long time, there was a flicker of hope. Unfortunately, it wouldn't last. Because staying on track with schizophrenia isn't just about taking medicine, it's about believing you still need it. And that belief would soon begin to slip away. The calm didn't last, because with schizophrenia, even a moment of stability can be deceiving. From the outside, Romechia Simms looked like she was managing taking her medication, living with family, doing her best to care for Ji'Aire. But inside her mind, the doubt had already started creeping back in. And then came the moment Ji'Aire Lee had feared. Romechia took Ji'Aire and fled from the motel during a psychotic episode. No warning, no plan, just fear. In her mind, someone was after them. She jumped from a moving taxi on the side of a dark highway, clutching Ji'Aire in her arms. The boy was barefoot, freezing, dressed in nothing but thin pajamas, wandering along the shoulder of the road with his mother, who believed she was being hunted. James found them. By some miracle, he was able to track them down before things turned deadly. But what he saw broke something inside him. His son was trembling, blue-lipped, shivering uncontrollably. And Romechia, she didn't even seem to know what she had done. That night changed everything. James filed for full custody. He laid it all out in the paperwork. The psychiatric diagnosis, the delusions, the highway incident, the danger Ji'Aire had been exposed to. He wasn't angry. He wasn't looking for revenge. He just wanted to protect his son. But the court didn't see it that way. Despite the evidence, despite the fear, despite Romechia's history, the judge ruled both parents fit to care for Ji'Aire. Shared custody would continue. 1 week with James, 1 week with Romechia. No modifications. No mandatory supervision. No mental health monitoring. James walked out of that courtroom gutted. The papers said joint custody, but to him it felt like a countdown. And he was right. Because just days later, the voices came back. Romechia stopped taking her medication. Quietly, deliberately. Not out of malice, not out of neglect, but because she believed once again that she didn't need it. And no one, not James, not Vontasha, not the courts, knew in time to stop what came next. On May 22nd, 2015, something about the scene at Wills Memorial Park just didn't feel right. A man who walked there often had seen the same woman, in the same exact spot for what felt like days, just standing there, pushing her child on a swing. He figured maybe the kid was just really relaxed, or maybe the mum was lost in thought. But now it was Friday morning, and they'd been there since Wednesday. Same swing, same motion, same little boy, only he never seemed to move. No squirming, no laughter, no complaints about being cold, just silence. The man pulled out his phone and called the police. When officers arrived, they approached cautiously. At first it looked peaceful. Romechia Simms, 24 years old, stood behind the swing set, hands on the chains, gently rocking her son like any mother might. Except something was off. They called out to her. She didn't flinch. She just kept pushing. And when they got close enough to see his face, the truth hit like a punch to the chest. Ji'Aire Lee was dead. His body was limp, his skin pale. He was still strapped into the swing by the safety belt. He'd been gone for hours, maybe even days. Romechia didn't panic, didn't cry. She looked at the officers and calmly told them she was waiting for someone to come take him. That was what the voices had said. Don't stop pushing. Don't take him down. Just wait. If she did it herself, they warned, something terrible would happen. And so for nearly 2 days, Romechia stayed at that swing, through rain, through cold, through nightfall, following instructions only she could hear. The call that shattered everything came just after sunrise. Ji'Aire Lee picked up the phone and heard the words no father should ever hear. His son was gone, the very person he had tried so hard to protect Ji'Aire from, the woman he once loved, the mother of his child, had unintentionally taken his life through the grip of untreated mental illness. Romechia Simms, Romechia's mother, got the same news. Her grandson, the little boy who once filled motel rooms with laughter and video games, would never run down the hallway again, never smile, never come home. The fear they'd carried for months had come true in the worst possible way. Ji'Aire's body was taken for autopsy. Romechia was transported to a psychiatric facility for immediate evaluation. And while no one needed a report to confirm what had happened, the medical examiner did it anyway, just to put it on paper. Cause of death: hypothermia and dehydration. Ji'Aire Lee had died slowly, quietly, in the cold air of a Maryland playground, while the person who loved him most kept pushing that swing, believing she was saving his life. When the story finally hit the news, it spread like wildfire. People couldn't wrap their minds around it. A mother pushing her dead child on a swing. Not for minutes, not even for hours, but for 2 full days. It was labeled heartbreaking, disturbing, incomprehensible. And yet, it happened. In a real place, to a real boy. Ji'Aire Lee was laid to rest in a quiet service surrounded by family still reeling from the shock. No one had answers, just grief. James Lee stood graveside, thinking of one thing: the custody hearing. He'd gone to court with everything: hospital records, proof of Romechia's condition, even a near-death incident involving Ji'Aire. But it hadn't been enough. The judge said both parents were fit. And now his son was gone. That decision would haunt James for the rest of his life. There was no question about what happened. No mystery to solve. Romechia hadn't hidden. She hadn't run. She was still at the swing when officers arrived, hands moving back and forth, obeying voices only she could hear. Detectives interviewed the man who made the initial 911 call. He told them he'd seen the same woman, in the same spot for multiple days, always pushing, always alone. Security footage backed him up. Romechia had entered the park on May 20th and never left. The case closed fast. Because this wasn't about violence or cruelty. It was about untreated mental illness, and the devastating silence that often comes with it. Romechia remained under psychiatric observation until her case went before a judge in early 2016. There was no dramatic courtroom moment, no gasps from the gallery. She entered a plea, involuntary manslaughter, and the court accepted it. The facts weren't in dispute. What mattered now was Romechia's state of mind. Mental health experts testified that she was suffering from severe, active schizophrenia. At the time of Ji'Aire's death, she couldn't comprehend what was real, couldn't separate her own thoughts from the voices, couldn't tell the difference between love and danger. And that's what made it so tragic. In the end, the judge ruled that Romechia was not criminally responsible. Instead of prison, she was ordered into long-term psychiatric treatment with conditions. She would be monitored, she would stay on medication, and she would never be allowed around children without strict supervision. But for James, none of it felt like justice. He had gone through all the proper channels, filed the motions, begged the court to listen, pointed to the red flags. But still, Ji'Aire was handed back. The system that was supposed to protect his son failed him at every turn. For Romechia, the pain doubled. She had already lost her grandson. Now she was losing her daughter in pieces. One medication, one diagnosis, one hollow-eyed visit at a time. She'd done everything she could. Opened her home, fought for treatment, watched over both of them. And somehow, it still wasn't enough. Reports say Romechia visits Ji'Aire's grave often. Sometimes she brings toys, sometimes she sings. No one really knows how much she understands about what happened that day in the park. Maybe that's a mercy. Maybe not. What is certain is this. One little boy lost his life not to hatred or violence, but to a disease no one could fully reach in time. A disease that didn't just take Ji'Aire. It shattered everyone who loved him. And for those who knew him, who remember his laughter, his energy, his joy, the sound of a playground swing will never feel the same again. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the world wears the face of someone who means well. Stay aware, speak up. And if something doesn't feel right, don't look away. We'll see you in the next case. Thanks for listening.